Every holiday I told myself it would be different. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every Easter dinner at my husband's parents' house, I promised myself I wouldn't let it get to me this time. I would stay calm. I would smile. I would remind myself that it was only a few hours. But the truth is, I stopped feeling like a guest the first year I married into that family. I became the help. The moment I stepped through the front door, purse still on my shoulder, coat not even off yet, my mother-in-law's voice would cut through the house. "Oh, good, you're here," she'd say. "Can you start on the potatoes? Not hello, not how was the drive, not how have you been. Just instructions." My sister-in-law would already be sitting on the couch scrolling on her phone, legs crossed, sipping wine. My mother-in-law would hover nearby, directing everything while doing nothing. And my husband would disappear upstairs or outside, suddenly very busy with something vague and important. I was 29 the first time I noticed it. 32 when I finally understood it wasn't accidental. And 34 when I stopped pretending it didn't hurt. That Thanksgiving was the one that broke something in me. The kitchen was hot. The oven alarm kept beeping. Grease popped against my wrist as I flipped something in a pan. My mother-in-law stood behind me, arms folded, criticizing the seasoning. "Too much salt," she said. "You Americans always overdo it." I bit my tongue. My sister-in-law laughed from the living room. "She's just sensitive." Sensitive. I looked over at my husband, hoping stupidly for a look, a word, anything. He was laughing too. Not with me. At me. I carried plates to the table while everyone else remained seated. When something ran out, eyes turned to me automatically. No one asked. They just waited. I noticed it then. How natural it felt to them. As if this was my role. As if it had always been this way. As if I should be grateful just to be there. During dinner, my mother-in-law praised the food. "She really knows how to work in a kitchen," she said to a guest. I taught her well. I stared at my plate. She hadn't taught me anything. I had learned to survive. After dinner, while everyone moved back to the living room, I stayed behind to clean. Plates stacked, scraps scraped, sink filled with hot, cloudy water. No one offered help. No one noticed. And my husband never came back for me. That was when the question finally formed in my mind, sharp and unavoidable. When did I stop being family and start being labor? Later that night, as we drove home, I said quietly, "It would have been nice if someone helped." My husband sighed like I had asked for too much. "You know how my mom is." "Yes," I said, "I do." "And my sister doesn't cook," he added. "It's just how things are." Just how things are. That sentence echoed in my head long after he fell asleep, because I realized something then. This wasn't about cooking. It wasn't about holidays. It was about respect. And the truth I hadn't wanted to face was this. My husband had watched me be reduced to a servant and said nothing because it made his life easier. That night, lying awake beside him, I made myself a quiet promise. I would never again let anyone confuse my kindness for obligation. They thought I was invisible. They were wrong. They had just taught me exactly where the power sat at that table. And soon they would learn what happens when the person holding everything together finally lets go. The weeks after Thanksgiving passed the way they always did. Quiet on the surface, loud underneath. I went back to my routine. Work during the day, groceries on the way home, cooking dinners my husband barely noticed, folding laundry while he watched television, making small talk about things that didn't matter because talking about the things that did always ended the same way, with his silence. At first I told myself he didn't see it, that maybe he truly believed this was normal family behavior, that maybe if I explained it clearly enough, gently enough, he would understand. So one Sunday evening when the house was quiet and there was no holiday pressure hanging over us, I tried again. "I feel invisible when we're with your family," I said, keeping my voice calm. He didn't look up from his phone. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I cook, I clean, I serve everyone, and no one treats me like a guest, or even like family." He sighed long and slow as if the conversation itself was exhausting him. "They don't mean anything by it." "That doesn't change how it feels," I said. He finally looked at me, then irritation flickering across his face. "You're reading too much into it." That sentence landed harder than anything his mother had ever said. Reading too much into it. I thought of the way his sister never lifted a finger, the way his mother inspected my work instead of helping, the way he disappeared every time plates needed clearing. Those weren't misunderstandings. They were patterns. "I'm not asking for a fight," I said quietly. "I'm asking for support." He leaned back on the couch. "What do you want me to do? Start an argument at the table. Make things awkward." So that was it. My comfort was less important than their comfort. I nodded slowly. "No," I said. "I wouldn't want things to be awkward." The conversation ended there, but something inside me shifted. I stopped asking. December arrived, and with it came Christmas, the second holiday of the season. The second test I already knew I would fail if I played by the same rules. The house smelled like pine and roasted meat when we arrived, decorations everywhere, music playing, Laughter from the living room. I stood in the doorway, coat still on, and waited. Nothing. No greeting. No acknowledgement. Just my mother-in-law's voice drifting from the kitchen. "You can start on the salad." Not even a question. I looked at my husband. He shrugged. "I'll be right back," he said, already walking away. Of course he would be. I tied on an apron and went to work. As I chopped vegetables, my sister-in-law wandered in, glass of wine in hand. "Wow," she said, glancing around. "You're really in your element." I didn't answer. She leaned against the counter, watching me like I was part of the decor. "Mom says you're so good at this stuff. I could never." That was when I realized something important. They weren't just taking advantage of me. They were congratulating themselves for it. At dinner, the praise came again. My mother-in-law beamed as she listed everything I had made, accepting compliments like they belonged to her. My husband smiled proudly. Not at me, at the food. After dinner, when everyone settled back into their seats, I stayed standing. No one noticed. I carried plates to the sink one by one, the clink of ceramic louder than it should have been. My hands moved automatically, but my mind was sharp and alert. I watched them through the doorway. My husband laughing, his sister reclining comfortably, his mother holding court. None of them looked toward the kitchen. That was when the realization finally settled fully into place. They didn't treat me like this because they didn't respect me. They treated me like this because they didn't have to. I was reliable, predictable, quiet, and my husband benefited the most. That night driving home, I didn't bring it up. I didn't sigh. I didn't cry. I went silent. And silence, I learned, made him uneasy. "Everything okay?" he asked, glancing over. "Yes," I said. He frowned. "You're quiet." "I'm just tired," I replied. That was true, but not in the way he thought. I was tired of explaining myself, tired of hoping, tired of doing emotional labor for people who had decided long ago that my comfort was optional. In the days that followed, I began paying closer attention, not to what they said, to what they assumed. They assumed I would show up early. They assumed I would cook. They assumed I would clean. They assumed I would smile. And my husband assumed I would keep doing it. I noticed how quickly he defended his mother when I expressed discomfort, how often he reframed my pain as overreaction, how rarely he checked in on me when we were around them. It wasn't cruelty. It was convenience. And convenience, I realized, can be just as damaging. One evening, as I folded laundry, I found myself wondering something that made my hands pause mid-motion. What would happen if I didn't show up? Not physically, emotionally. What would happen if I stopped filling the gaps? The thought scared me, which told me it mattered. That night, lying awake beside my husband, listening to his steady breathing, I understood something I had avoided for years. My problem wasn't my mother-in-law. It wasn't my sister-in-law. It was the man sleeping next to me who had watched this happen and chosen comfort over courage every single time. And if I was ever going to take my dignity back, it wouldn't start with a confrontation. It would start with an absence, because when people are used to you doing everything, the first act of revenge is letting them feel what happens when you stop. And I was closer to stopping than they realized. The first time I didn't step in, it felt like standing at the edge of something dangerous. It was a Sunday dinner at my mother-in-law's house. Not a holiday, no excuse for extra expectations, just a regular gathering that somehow always turned into the same performance. I arrived at the same time as everyone else, not early, not apologetic. I took off my coat and sat down. And I waited. My mother-in-law glanced at the kitchen, then at me, then back at the kitchen again. She frowned slightly as if something was missing from the room, but she couldn't quite identify what it was. My sister-in-law kicked her shoes off and curled up on the couch. My husband picked up a beer and joined his father in the living room. No one moved toward the stove. Minutes passed, then 10. Finally, my mother-in-law cleared her throat. "Dinner will be ready soon," she said, looking directly at me. I smiled politely, "Great," and stayed seated. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. My mother-in-law shifted her weight. She glanced toward the kitchen again, then back at me. "You can start checking the oven," she said, not quite a request. I met her eyes. "Oh," I said lightly. "I thought you had it handled." Her mouth tightened. "Well," she said, forcing a laugh, "you're usually so helpful." Usually. That word echoed in my head. "I'm sure it'll be fine," I replied. I could feel my heart pounding, but my posture stayed relaxed. Hands folded in my lap, expression calm. This was harder than any argument I had ever imagined, because I wasn't defending myself. I wasn't explaining. I was simply refusing to play my part. My husband glanced over, confusion flickering across his face. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said. "Why wouldn't it be?" He looked at his mother. She looked at the kitchen. Finally, with an irritated sigh, she turned and walked toward the stove. I watched her stir a pot with quick, aggressive movements. The clatter of utensils was louder than usual. My sister-in-law raised her eyebrows at me, amused. "Well, she said this is new." I smiled back. People change. Dinner was tense. The food was slightly overcooked, the seasoning uneven. No one said much. My mother-in-law kept glancing at me like she was waiting for something. An apology. An explanation. A return to normal. None came. After the meal plates sat on the table longer than usual, my husband stood hesitated, then sat back down. My sister-in-law didn't move. My mother-in-law stared at the dishes. Finally, she snapped, "Someone needs to clear this." I took a sip of water. "Yes," I said, "someone does." The look she gave me was sharp enough to cut. She stood abruptly and began stacking plates herself. My husband watched, uncomfortable but silent. That silence told me everything. On the drive home, the tension finally broke. "What was that about?" he asked. I kept my eyes on the road. What about? "You didn't help," he said, incredulous. "You embarrassed my mom." I laughed softly. "By sitting down?" "You know what I mean," he said. "You made it awkward." I nodded. "That's how it feels for me every time." He scoffed. "You're being dramatic." There it was again. Dramatic. I pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. "I'm being honest." He shook his head. "This is how my family works. You knew that when you married me." I looked at him, then really looked. "You're right," I said. "I did know." He relaxed slightly, thinking he'd won. "And now I'm choosing not to work that way anymore," I added. His expression changed. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm done being the default," I said. "If someone wants help, they can ask. If someone expects effort, they can offer respect." "You're overreacting," he said. "It's just dinner." "No," I replied. "It's just the pattern." He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. We went inside without another word. That night he slept facing away from me. I stared at the ceiling, adrenaline still humming through my body. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't cried. I hadn't explained myself into exhaustion. I had simply stopped. And that terrified him more than any confrontation ever had. Over the next few weeks, I repeated the experiment. At a birthday gathering, I brought a dish and nothing else. No early arrival. No staying late to clean. At a casual brunch, I stayed in the living room and talked while others worked around me. Each time the tensions increased. My mother-in-law grew colder. My sister-in-law grew more curious. My husband grew more irritated. "You're making things difficult," he said one night. "I'm making things visible," I replied. The truth was, I was learning something new about myself. I had always believed kindness meant contribution. I was learning that sometimes kindness meant restraint. The more I stepped back, the more obvious it became how much I had been holding together. Meals ran late, messes lingered, complaints surfaced, and slowly, unmistakably, the narrative began to shift. I wasn't ungrateful. I wasn't lazy. I was inconvenient, because my absence forced them to see the imbalance they had benefited from for years. And that imbalance was about to cost them more than uncomfortable dinners. Because once you stop being invisible, people have to decide how to treat you. And not everyone likes the answer they're forced to give. The next chapter would be about escalation. Because silence once broken has a way of demanding a response. And they were running out of ways to pretend nothing had changed. The shift didn't go unnoticed. I knew that before anyone said a word, before the looks grew sharper, before the conversation started happening without me in the room, families like theirs didn't confront problems directly. They absorbed them, discussed them quietly, and then presented a unified front, and I was now the problem. The next gathering was a Sunday lunch, the kind that used to feel harmless. I arrived with my husband empty-handed except for a bottle of wine I had picked up on the way, not as an apology, just as a gesture. My mother-in-law took it from me without a smile. "That's all?" she asked, glancing at my hands. "Yes," I said, "that's all." She turned away without responding. The atmosphere felt different immediately, tighter, controlled. My sister-in-law sat straighter than usual, her phone face-down eyes flicking between me and their mother. My husband kissed my cheek quickly, then drifted away. I could almost see the plan unfolding. Dinner was already cooking when we arrived. That alone would have once filled me with relief. Now it made me suspicious. We sat down to eat, and for the first time since I'd known them, no one commented on the food. No praise, no criticism, no acknowledgement at all. It was a small thing, but it was deliberate. They had stopped trying to pull me back into my role. They were replacing it. After the meal, my mother-in-law stood and began clearing plates without looking at me. "I'll take care of this," she said loudly, as if announcing a performance. "Some people don't feel like helping anymore." My sister-in-law jumped up immediately. "I'll help, Mom." They worked together in the kitchen, laughing too loudly, moving with exaggerated efficiency. I stayed seated, hands folded, my face neutral. I wasn't angry. I was observing. This was their response. Not accountability, not reflection, reassignment. When they returned, my mother-in-law sat down across from me and smiled thinly. "Well, she said it's nice to know who we can count on." My husband shifted uncomfortably. He didn't say anything. I met her eyes. It's always good to have clarity. Her smile disappeared. The drive home was silent until halfway through when my husband finally spoke. You didn't have to make it so obvious, he said. I kept my gaze forward. I didn't make anything obvious. You embarrassed my mom, he replied. She was trying. At what I asked, he frowned, at holding things together. I let out a quiet breath. So was I for years. That's different, he said. Why, I asked. He hesitated. Because you're my wife. There it was. Not because I was respected, not because I was valued, because I was expected. That doesn't mean I'm required to absorb everything I said. He scoffed. You're blowing this out of proportion. I turned to him then. You keep saying that, but you never say I'm wrong. He opened his mouth, then closed it. That's silence again. The next few weeks were worse. Messages stopped including me. Plans were made without asking my availability. When I was present, conversations shifted away the moment I spoke. I had gone from being useful to being inconvenient. And inconvenient women are dangerous in families like this. My mother-in-law began dropping comments disguised as concern. I worry you're overwhelmed, she said one afternoon. You seem tense. I'm actually less stressed than I've been in years, I replied. She nodded slowly. That's not how it looks. What she meant was it doesn't fit the story. My sister-in-law was more direct. You've changed, she said once, cornering me in the hallway. Yes, I replied, I have. She crossed her arms. You used to be nicer. I smiled. I used to be quieter. That unsettled her. At home, the atmosphere shifted too. My husband became distant, short-tempered, passive-aggressive in small, cutting ways. Are you coming with me, or are you sitting this one out too? He asked one night before another family dinner. I'll come, I said. I just won't perform. He shook his head. I don't recognize you anymore. That sentence should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it clarified something I had been avoiding. He didn't miss me. He missed the versions of me that made his life easier. The tension finally came to a head during a small family gathering I hadn't even wanted to attend. My mother-in-law announced casually in front of everyone, We don't expect you to help anymore. It's clear you have different priorities now. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to me. This was the moment they expected: embarrassment, defensiveness, an apology. I smiled gently. Thank you for understanding. The shock on her face was almost comical. She had expected resistance. What she got was agreement. After that, something subtle but important happened. They stopped assigning me tasks, but they also stopped treating me like family. I had been demoted from servant to outsider, and oddly enough, that hurt less, because outsiders are free to leave. That night, lying in bed beside my husband, I stared at the dark and understood something I had resisted for too long. This wasn't a phase. This was a line. And once you cross it, there's no going back to pretending. They were closing ranks, but they had underestimated one thing. I didn't need to be included anymore. I just needed to decide what I was willing to stay for. And that decision was coming faster than any of them realized. The first apology I didn't give stayed lodged in my throat for hours. It was a Tuesday, ordinary, uneventful. No family gathering, no audience. Just a quiet evening at home when my husband came back later than usual, dropped his keys on the counter, and looked at me like he had been carrying something heavy all day. They're upset, he said. I didn't look up from the sink. About what? About you, he replied. I waited. You didn't respond to my mom's message, he added. She was just trying to smooth things over. I dried my hands slowly. What did she say? That she hopes you're not holding on to resentment, he said. That families make compromises. There it was. The invitation to apologize. The expectation that I would rush in to reassure everyone that everything was fine, that I hadn't meant to upset anyone, that of course I understood. I felt it rise instinctively, the urge to explain myself, to soften, to fix, and then I let it pass. I'm not resentful, I said. I'm aware. He frowned. That's not helpful. It's honest, I replied. He exhaled sharply. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. I turned to face him. No, I'm just not making it smaller for your comfort anymore. He stared at me like I had spoken another language. Why are you doing this? He asked. Why now? That question landed differently than he intended. Why now? Because something in me had finally broken quietly beyond repair. Because I was tired of apologizing for being tired, for needing rest, for wanting respect. Because I had realized that every apology I offered was an admission that I had done something wrong, and I hadn't. I'm not doing anything, I said. I've stopped undoing myself. He laughed without humor. You sound dramatic. I nodded. You keep using that word. It doesn't change the truth. That night he slept on the couch. Not because we fought, because he couldn't stand the calm. Over the next few weeks, I noticed how often apologies were expected of me. If dinner wasn't ready, I was supposed to say sorry. If I declined an invitation, I was supposed to explain. If I expressed discomfort, I was supposed to soften it with reassurance. I stopped. I declined politely without elaboration. I expressed feelings without cushioning them. I went quiet when conversations turned dismissive. The effect was immediate. My mother-in-law sent messages dripping with concern. "I hope you're okay. You seem distant. We miss the old you." I didn't respond. My sister-in-law tried a different approach. "Mom's really hurt," she texted. "She doesn't understand why you're acting like this." I typed, then erased, then typed again. "I'm not acting, I'm responding." I didn't send it. Silence was clearer. At work, something strange happened. I started getting noticed. Not because I was louder or more aggressive, but because I stopped overcompensating. I spoke when I had something to say. I didn't volunteer to fix problems that weren't mine. I didn't apologize for asking questions. A colleague pulled me aside one afternoon. "You've changed," she said, "in a good way." I smiled, "Thank you." It occurred to me then how different environments respond to boundaries. Healthy ones adjust. Unhealthy ones resist. The resistance at home intensified. My husband grew sharper, less patient. He accused me of withdrawing, of being cold, of creating distance. "You're not the woman I married," he said one night. I looked at him steadily. "I am. I just stopped disappearing." He shook his head. "You're tearing this family apart." "No," I replied. "I'm refusing to be torn apart for it." The argument escalated quickly after that. He accused me of disrespecting his parents, of embarrassing him, of making holidays uncomfortable. I listened. Then I said something I had never said before. "I don't feel safe being myself around your family." The room went quiet. "Safe," he repeated. "They're not abusing you." I held his gaze. "They're erasing me." "That's ridiculous," he snapped. "Is it?" I asked. "Or is it just inconvenient to admit?" He had no answer. That night, lying awake alone, I realized something terrifying and freeing at the same time. I didn't miss him when he wasn't beside me. I missed the idea of partnership, the promise of being chosen, but not the reality. The next family gathering came and went without me. "I'm not feeling up to it," I said when my husband asked. He looked relieved. "That's probably for the best." I watched him leave keys in hand and noticed the quiet that followed. It wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. For the first time in years, I spent a holiday evening exactly how I wanted. I cooked a simple meal. I watched a movie. I went to bed early. No tension, no performance, no apology. When my husband came home, he didn't say much. But he looked at me differently, like someone realizing a structure they relied on had quietly stopped holding weight. I knew then that this wasn't about holidays or kitchens or chores. It was about power, and I had just taken mine back. The next chapter would be about what happens when people realize they can no longer control you through expectation. Because once you stop apologizing for existing, the rules change. And not everyone survives the change. The first holiday I skipped felt illegal. Like I was breaking a rule no one had ever written down, but everyone somehow enforced. It was Easter. Soft pastels, family photos, long tables. The kind of day my mother-in-law usually planned weeks in advance, assigning dishes like obligations and seating like hierarchy. This year I didn't go. I didn't pretend to be sick. I didn't offer an excuse. I didn't say maybe next time. "I'm not coming," I told my husband the night before. He paused mid-scroll on his phone. "Why?" "I don't want to," I said. He looked up sharply. "That's it?" "Yes." He stared at me like he was waiting for the rest of the sentence. The apology, the explanation, the reassurance that this wasn't personal. None came. "You're really doing this," he said finally. I nodded. "I am." He scoffed. "Do you know how that looks?" I met his eyes. "Do you know how it feels?" He shook his head. "You're being selfish." The word didn't sting the way he expected. I had worn it for years already, quietly, internally. Every time I swallowed frustration to keep peace. "If taking care of myself is selfish," I said calmly, "then yes." He left early the next morning. The house felt strangely hollow after the door closed. No rush, no checklist, no pressure to perform. I made coffee slowly, sat by the window, watched the light shift across the floor. I didn't feel guilty. That surprised me. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother-in-law. "We expected you today." No greeting, no concern, just expectation. I didn't respond. An hour later, another message appeared. "Everyone's asking where you are." Still nothing. Then a third. "I hope this isn't how you plan to handle family matters." I turned my phone face down. At 3 in the afternoon, my sister-in-law called. I let it ring. The silence felt loud at first, then steady. I realized something important in that quiet. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about the disruption, the missing piece, the empty role. When my husband came home that evening, his jaw was tight. "You embarrassed us," he said, dropping his keys too hard on the counter. "I wasn't there," I replied. "How could I embarrass anyone?" "They had to explain why you weren't there," he snapped. "My mom was upset." I nodded. I imagined she was. "You didn't even tell her," he said. "I told you," I replied. "That used to be enough." He stared at me. "You don't care anymore." "I care," I said, "just not at my own expense." That night, we slept in the same bed, backs turned, the space between us heavier than any argument. The next week, the narrative shifted. Not directly, subtly. My mother-in-law began telling people she was worried about me, that I seemed withdrawn, that I was struggling, that maybe I was overwhelmed. Concern is control. I heard about it through my husband. She's just worried, he said. She thinks you might be depressed. I laughed softly. I've never felt clearer. He frowned. That's not how it looks. I met his gaze, to whom he didn't answer. The truth was, my absence had forced them to confront something uncomfortable. They had lost access. And people who are used to access rarely accept its removal gracefully. Another invitation came the following weekend. Dinner, casual, no pressure. I'm not going, I said again. My husband exploded. This is ridiculous, he said. You're punishing everyone. I'm opting out, I replied. There's a difference. You're tearing this family apart, he said. I took a breath. Your family was intact while I was invisible. If my visibility causes damage, that tells you something. He ran a hand through his hair. So what now? You just stop showing up? I show up where I'm respected, I said. That includes my own home. He stared at me like he was finally seeing the shape of the choice in front of him. You're asking me to choose, he said. No, I replied. I'm noticing what you've already chosen. That landed hard. Over the next month, I became a topic of discussion without being present. I could feel it in this way conversations stopped when I entered rooms, in the way my husband repeated phrases that weren't his. They think you're cold. They don't recognize you anymore. They miss the old you. I did too. She was kind. She was accommodating. She was exhausted. And she was gone. The more I stayed away, the more frantic the responses became. My mother-in-law invited us over to talk. My sister-in-law suggested a girls' day. My husband urged me to compromise just this once. I refused them all. Not angrily. Calmly. That calm unsettled everyone, because anger could be argued with. Calm could not. One evening, my husband sat across from me at the kitchen table and asked quietly, "Do you even want to be married anymore?" The question surprised me. Not because it was asked, but because I had already been living the answer. I want a marriage where I'm not erased, I said. He nodded slowly. And if I can't give you that, I held his gaze, then we'll have to be honest about what we're actually holding on to. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was heavy with truth. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, not of losing me, of losing the structure that had always protected him from discomfort. That was when I knew. This wasn't just about family dinners. This was about what happens when a woman steps out of the role everyone else depends on. And the next holiday would force all of us to confront exactly how replaceable that role really was. Because once you stop showing up, people have to decide whether they miss you, or just what you used to do. The next holiday came sooner than I expected. Memorial weekend, a backyard gathering. Nothing formal, my husband said. Just burgers, sides, family, low stakes. That was how they framed it. I already knew better. I'm not going, I said again, folding laundry as if the words carried no weight at all. My husband stood in the doorway, arms crossed. You don't even know what they're planning. I know how it ends, I replied, with me in the kitchen and everyone else relaxed. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. They said they wouldn't expect you to do anything he tried. I looked up at him. Did they say that to me? He hesitated. No, he admitted. Then it's not a promise, I said. It's bait. He left without another word. This time I didn't feel the sharp anxiety that had followed Easter. I felt something closer to curiosity. I wanted to know what would happen without me. The answer came sooner than I thought. My phone started buzzing just after noon. A text from my sister-in-law. Do you know where Mom keeps the big serving platters? I stared at the screen, then set the phone down. Another message came in. Did you already season the potato salad last time, or was that Mom? I didn't reply. A third message. Everything's kind of chaotic here. That one made me smile. Around 3 p.m, my husband called. His voice was tight. Where did you put the extra charcoal? I don't know, I said honestly. I've never handled the grill. He exhaled sharply. Mom's upset. I leaned back on the couch. I imagine she is. You could help, he said. Just answer a few questions. I shook my head even though he couldn't see it. That would defeat the point. What point, he snapped. That this was never effortless, I replied. It was invisible. He hung up. I spent the afternoon reading, napping, moving through my own space without interruption. For the first time in years, a holiday passed without tension in my body. When my husband came home, it was obvious something had gone wrong. His shirt was stained, his hair disheveled, his mood brittle. They ran out of food, he said flatly. I raised an eyebrow. Already. Things weren't timed right, he continued. Stuff burned. People were hungry. I nodded. That's unfortunate. He stared at me. That's all you have to say. What would you like me to say? I asked. He sank into a chair, rubbing his face. They didn't realize how much you did. There it was. Not an apology, but an admission. And I asked gently, and it was stressful, he said. Mom was overwhelmed. My sister didn't know what to do. Everyone kept asking questions. Questions. The same ones I had answered for years without acknowledgement. I let the silence stretch. Finally, he looked up at me. They miss you. I met his eyes. Do they miss me? He hesitated. Or do they miss the ease I added? He didn't answer. That night, my mother-in-law texted me directly. It was the first message she had sent me in weeks. We could really use your help next time. No greeting. No apology. Just expectation repackaged as invitation. I didn't respond. The next day, a longer message arrived. I know things have been tense, but family shows up for each other. I hope you haven't forgotten that. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed one sentence. Family doesn't assign roles without consent. I sent it. She didn't reply. The silence that followed was different this time. Heavier, because something had cracked. At dinner that night, my husband was quieter than usual. He picked at his food, avoiding my eyes. They're not happy, he said eventually. I know, I replied. They think you're punishing them, he continued. I'm not punishing anyone, I said. I'm opting out of being taken for granted. He frowned. They don't see the difference. That's not surprising, I replied. They never had to. He leaned back, exhaling. You're changing everything. I nodded. Yes. Is that what you want? He asked. The question hung between us. Yes, I said, because the old version of everything was slowly killing me. That night I slept deeply. No rehearsed conversations, no knots in my stomach, no dread of the next gathering. Just rest. Over the following weeks, the tone shifted again. My mother-in-law stopped issuing instructions and started making vague requests. My sister-in-law asked questions instead of assuming answers. My husband began checking in before committing us to plans. Small changes, but telling ones. They had learned something important. Not how to treat me better, but how much worse things became without me. And that knowledge was dangerous. Because once people realize how dependent they are on someone they've dismissed, they often try one of two things. They either change or they retaliate. And I knew exactly which one my mother-in-law was more likely to choose. The next chapter would be about that choice. Because when entitlement loses its comfort, it doesn't always go quietly. Sometimes it sharpens its teeth. The retaliation didn't come loudly. It came politely. It arrived wrapped in concern, delivered with smiles and framed as help. And that made it far more dangerous than anger ever could. It started with a phone call from my mother-in-law on a quiet weekday afternoon. I've been thinking about you, she said. Her voice was gentle, almost warm. That alone set my nerves on edge. I worry you're carrying too much, she continued. You've seemed withdrawn lately. I leaned against the kitchen counter, listening carefully. I'm actually doing well. She made a small sound of disbelief. Sometimes people don't realize they're struggling until it's pointed out. There it was. The attempt to redefine me. I'm not struggling, I said calmly. Well, she replied from the outside, it looks like you're isolating yourself. Skipping family events. Pulling away. I'm choosing where to spend my energy, I said. That's not isolation. She sighed softly. I just hope you're not letting resentment harden your heart. I closed my eyes. This wasn't concern. This was narrative control. I'm not resentful, I said. I'm clear. She didn't like that answer. The next move came through my sister-in-law. She texted me later that week. Mom thinks you might benefit from talking to someone, just to process things. I stared at the screen. They weren't asking if I was okay. They were diagnosing me. I didn't respond. Then my husband came home with a familiar look on his face, the one he wore when he'd already agreed to something without me. Maybe they're right, he said carefully. You have been distant. I turned to him slowly. Distant from what? From everyone, he said. From the family. And how do you feel about that, I asked. He hesitated. It's uncomfortable. I nodded. For you. He frowned. For everyone. No, I corrected. For the system that depended on my silence. That made him flinch. They're worried, he insisted. They think you're changing. I have changed, I said. That's not a crisis. It is to them, he replied. And there it was again. Their comfort over my autonomy. That weekend, without warning, my mother-in-law showed up at our door. She didn't call ahead. She stood on the porch holding a pie, smiling like nothing had happened. I was in the neighborhood, she said. I knew better. I let her in. She sat at the table and looked around slowly, taking inventory. My life, my space, my independence. You seem tired, she said, finally. I met her gaze. I'm not. She tilted her head. Sometimes people don't realize how they come across. I smiled faintly. And sometimes people mistake control for care. Her smile froze. I'm just trying to help, she said. Help would have looked like sharing the load, I replied, not questioning my sanity when I stopped carrying it. The silence that followed was brittle. She placed the pie on the table like an offering. You used to be so agreeable. I nodded. I used to think that was required. She straightened. Families don't function when everyone does whatever they want. I leaned forward slightly. Families don't function when one person does everything and everyone else watches. Her lips pressed into a thin line. That was the moment she realized something she hadn't expected. I wasn't confused. I wasn't overwhelmed. I wasn't going to be coaxed back into place. She stood abruptly. "I think you're making a mistake." I met her eyes. I think I waited too long to stop making one. She left without the pie. That evening, my husband was furious. "You humiliated her," he said. "I told the truth," I replied. "You didn't have to be so harsh." "I wasn't harsh," I said. "I was direct. There's a difference." He paced the room. "She thinks you hate her." I looked at him steadily. "I think she hates losing control." That shut him up. The next few days were tense. Messages came through extended family, subtle questions, concerned check-ins, carefully worded comments about how everyone missed how things used to be. I could feel the pressure building. They were circling, trying to pull me back into the version of myself that made them comfortable. But that version no longer existed. At work, meanwhile, I thrived. I took on a new project, led meetings, left on time without guilt. I felt grounded in a way I never had before. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Healthy environments responded to boundaries with respect. Unhealthy ones responded with manipulation. That clarity was painful. But it was also freeing. One night, as my husband and I sat in silence, he finally said it. "They think you've changed because of me." I looked at him. "Have I?" He swallowed. "Maybe." "No," I said gently. "I changed because of myself. You just didn't stop it." That hurt him. I could see it. But it was true. And truth was no longer something I was willing to soften. I knew then that the next step wouldn't be subtle. They had tried guilt. They had tried concern. They had tried rewriting me as unstable. When those fail, people like my mother-in-law only have one move left. They force a confrontation. And when they did, they wouldn't be ready for the woman who showed up. Because I was no longer defending myself. I was defining myself. And that changes everything. The confrontation came disguised as an invitation. A group message, polite, neutral, carefully worded. We should all sit down and talk, clear the air. No accusations, just family. I read it twice. Then I read what wasn't there. No acknowledgement of harm, no apology, no curiosity about my experience. Just an assumption that a conversation would reset everything back to where they preferred it. My husband hovered nearby while I typed. "They just want to talk," he said. "Maybe this is a chance to fix things." I looked at him. "Do you think they're prepared to listen?" He hesitated. "I think they want peace." "So do I replied. "But not at any price." I agreed to go. Not because I believed them, because I was ready. We met at my mother-in-law's house early evening, neutral enough to feel reasonable, familiar enough to feel territorial. When we arrived, everyone was already seated. My mother-in-law at the head of the table, my sister-in-law beside her. My husband's father, quiet hands folded. My sister-in-law's husband leaning back, arms crossed. I took the empty chair. No one offered me a drink. My mother-in-law smiled tightly. "Thank you for coming." I nodded. "You said you wanted to talk." "Yes," she said. "We're worried about you." There it was again. The frame. "I'm doing well," I said. "What are you worried about?" She blinked. "You've pulled away. You've changed." I agreed. She leaned forward. "We just don't understand why." I looked around the table. "Would you like me to explain?" There was a murmur of assent. So I did. I spoke calmly, slowly, without accusation. I described holidays where I cooked while others relaxed. Gatherings where I was assigned work without being asked. Years of being treated as labor rather than family. No exaggeration. No raised voice. Just facts. My sister-in-law shifted uncomfortably. My father-in-law stared at the table. My mother-in-law listened, lips pressed together. When I finished, there was a pause. Then she spoke. "That was never our intention." I nodded. "Intent doesn't erase impact." She frowned. "You could have said something sooner." I did, I replied many times. To my husband. All eyes turned to him. He stiffened. I didn't think it was that serious. I looked at him. "Because it wasn't happening to you." My mother-in-law waved a hand dismissively. "This feels exaggerated." There it was. The dismissal. "I'm not here to convince you," I said. "I'm here to set boundaries." Her eyes narrowed. "Boundaries from family?" "Yes," I replied, "especially family." She straightened. "So what, you don't help anymore? You don't show up? You just withdraw and expect everyone to adjust?" I held her gaze. "I expect mutual respect." She scoffed. "This generation is so sensitive." I smiled faintly. "This generation names what previous ones normalized." That landed hard. My sister-in-law finally spoke. "So what do you want?" The question was sharp, impatient. I took a breath. "I want to be asked, not assigned. I want my no to be accepted. I want my presence to be valued, not my labor." "And if we can't do that," my mother-in-law asked. I didn't hesitate. "Then I won't participate." The room went still. My husband's father cleared his throat. "That seems extreme." "No," I replied. What was extreme was expecting one person to carry everything without complaint. My mother-in-law leaned back, studying me. You're willing to fracture this family over dishes. I met her eyes. You're willing to keep it intact by erasing me. Silence. She hadn't expected that. No one had. This wasn't the emotional outburst they'd prepared for. This was clarity. Finally, my husband spoke. What if we try harder? I turned to him. What does that mean? He faltered. I don't know. I don't want to lose everyone. I softened slightly. I'm not asking you to choose. I'm asking you to stop pretending neutrality isn't a choice. That hurt him. I could see it. But it was necessary. My mother-in-law stood. I think this conversation has gone far enough. I stood too. I agree. She looked surprised. You're leaving? Yes, I said. I said what I needed to say. She frowned. You didn't let us respond. I smiled gently. You've been responding for years. Tonight I spoke. We left shortly after. In the car, my husband was silent for a long time. You didn't back down, he said finally. No, I replied, I didn't. He nodded slowly. They're furious. I know, I said. He glanced at me. Are you okay with that? I thought about it. About the knots that used to live in my stomach, the dread, the constant self-monitoring. I'm okay with myself, I said, for the first time in a long time. That night, I slept deeply. No second guessing. No replaying conversations. Just rest. Because something fundamental had shifted. I had stopped asking to be understood. I had stated what I required. And when you do that, people reveal exactly who they are willing to be. The next chapter wouldn't be about talking. It would be about consequences. Because boundaries without consequences are just suggestions. And they were about to learn I was done making suggestions. Consequences rarely arrive with raised voices. They arrive quietly in the form of absence refusal and the slow collapse of assumptions people thought were permanent. The week after the confrontation, no one called. No follow-up message. No attempt to smooth things over. No apology. At first, that silence felt familiar. It was the same silence that had followed every time I had spoken up in the past. The difference now was that I didn't rush to fill it. I let it stand. My husband waited for me to break first. I could see it in the way he lingered near me, the way he brought up neutral topics, the way he avoided mentioning his family. They're giving it time, he said one evening, letting things cool off. I nodded, so am I. Another invitation arrived the following weekend. Casual again. Barbecue, no pressure. I didn't respond. My husband watched me read the message, then look away. You're not even answering, he asked. No, I said. An invitation without accountability isn't an invitation, it's a test. He sighed. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I looked at him steadily. It was easy when I did all the work. That shut him up. The real consequence came when the system they had relied on began to fail. Not dramatically, in small irritating ways. A gathering canceled because no one coordinated the food. A holiday meal ordered last minute and complained about endlessly. Arguments between my mother-in-law and sister-in-law over who was supposed to do what. I heard about it secondhand through my husband. They didn't realize how much you organized, he admitted one night. I didn't respond. Because the point was not recognition. The point was reality. At work, my life expanded. I was offered a leadership role I hadn't pursued before, not because I lacked ambition, but because I had lacked energy. I accepted without guilt. I stayed late when I chose to, not because I was expected to. I came home lighter. That contrast became impossible for my husband to ignore. You're happier, he said one evening, not accusing, just observing. Yes, I replied. He nodded slowly, without them. I didn't correct him. The tension in our marriage reached a different stage then. Not explosive, evaluative. He began to notice things he had never noticed before. How often his mother called him to complain. How quickly responsibility shifted onto whoever was most convenient. How silence was used as punishment. One night, after a long phone call with his mother, he came into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. She says you're tearing the family apart, he said. I didn't look up from my book. What do you think? He hesitated. I think the family only worked when you were absorbing everything. I closed the book. That's not sustainable, I said. No, he agreed, it's not. That was the first time he said it without defensiveness. The shift didn't turn him into a hero overnight. He didn't suddenly defend me publicly or confront his mother head-on. But something changed in the way he listened, in the way he paused before agreeing to plans, in the way he stopped volunteering me. That change unsettled his family more than my absence ever had, because now the imbalance was visible. My mother-in-law tried one last tactic. She invited my husband alone. Just him. A private conversation. He told me before he went. She wants to talk about us, he said. I nodded. Okay. You're not worried, he asked. No, I replied, because whatever she says doesn't change what I need. When he came home, his face was tight. She said, you're controlling me, he said. I raised an eyebrow. Did she? Yes, he replied. She said you've turned me against my family. I waited. She also said something else, he added quietly. What I asked. That I never protected you, he said. and that maybe I should have. That surprised me. Not because it was said, because it was admitted. She didn't say it kindly, he added, but she said it. I nodded. Truth doesn't need kindness to be true. He looked at me, then really looked. I didn't realize how much you were carrying, he said. I didn't rush to comfort him. I know, I replied. Silence filled the room. I don't want to lose you, he said finally. I met his gaze. Then don't ask me to lose myself. That was the line. Clear, final. From that point on, the consequences stopped being external. They became internal. My husband had to decide whether he was willing to live in a marriage that required courage instead of convenience. My mother-in-law had to accept that access was no longer automatic. My sister-in-law had to learn how to participate instead of observe. And I had to decide what kind of peace I wanted. The peace of silence, or the peace of alignment. I chose alignment, and that choice meant something else had to change. Because boundaries don't just restructure families, they restructure marriages. And the next chapter would force us to face the question we had been avoiding. Was this relationship built on partnership, or on my willingness to disappear? The answer was coming, and it would change everything. Once the noise from his family quieted, what remained between my husband and me felt louder than anything that had come before. There were no more distractions, no dinners to attend, no calls to deflect blame onto, no expectations to hide behind. Just the two of us sitting across from each other at our kitchen table, realizing that the conflict we'd been circling for years had finally landed where it belonged, between us. It started one evening when he asked a simple question that wasn't simple at all. When did you stop trusting me, he said. I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't know, but because I did. I stopped trusting you, I said carefully, when I realized you would rather I be uncomfortable than you be inconvenienced. He winced. That's not fair, he said. It's accurate, I replied. He leaned back, rubbing his hands together the way he did when he was nervous. I didn't think it was that bad. I know, I said. That's the problem. We talked longer that night than we had in years. Not in circles, not defensively, slowly, deliberately, like two people finally willing to remove the masks they had been wearing for a very long time. He admitted things he had never said out loud before, that he had grown up learning that peace meant silence, that challenging his mother felt like betrayal, that it was easier to let me handle things because I was capable. Capable, the word landed heavily. You didn't protect me because you believed I could take it, I said. He nodded, yes. And because if I took it, I continued you didn't have to. He swallowed hard, yes. That honesty hurt more than denial ever had. I needed a partner, I said, not a bystander. He nodded again, eyes wet. I know. The next weeks were uncomfortable in a new way. There was no clear villain to point at anymore. No mother-in-law to blame, no sister-in-law to resent. Just two people reckoning with a marriage that had been built on imbalance so quietly that neither of us had named it. He started doing things differently. Not performatively, awkwardly. He asked before committing us to plans. He checked in when his mother called. He stopped minimizing my reactions. Sometimes he got it wrong. Sometimes he froze. Sometimes he slipped back into old habits. And sometimes I had to stop him. No, I said more than once. That's not what I meant. Each time he listened. Not immediately, but eventually. One night, after another long conversation, he asked something that felt like a turning point. Do you still want to be married to me? He said. I closed my eyes. I want to be married to someone who stands next to me, I said. Not behind me. That could be me, he said quickly. Then you have to decide that, I replied. I can't decide it for you. He nodded slowly. I'm scared. I know, I said. So was I for years. The difference now was that I wasn't afraid of losing him anymore. I was afraid of losing myself again. That changed everything. We went to counseling. Not because I believed therapy could fix everything, but because I wanted a neutral space where patterns couldn't hide behind familiarity. In that room, I watched him hear things he had never truly heard before. How his silence functioned as agreement, how neutrality favored the powerful, how love without advocacy felt like abandonment. He didn't argue. He listened. That mattered. Meanwhile, his family continued to keep their distance. Not dramatically, cautiously. They invited him, not me. He declined more often than he accepted. When he did go, he came back quieter, thoughtful. They're frustrated, he told me once. They say everything feels different. It is different, I said. They say you changed me. I smiled faintly. Did I? He considered that. No, he said finally. You showed me something I didn't want to see. That was progress. But progress doesn't guarantee permanence. I knew that. I watched carefully. I paid attention to how he responded when things were inconvenient, not just when they were calm. I noticed when he corrected his mother gently instead of deflecting, when he shut down a complaint instead of absorbing it, when he asked me what I needed instead of assuming. And I noticed when he didn't. One evening after a long day, I said something out loud that surprised even me. "If this doesn't change in a lasting way," I said, "I will leave." He didn't react defensively. He nodded. "I know." That answer mattered, because for the first time, he wasn't clinging to the idea that I would stay no matter what. He understood that my presence was a choice, just like his. I realized then that revenge wasn't what I had been after. Not really. What I wanted was dignity, and dignity demands risk. As weeks turned into months, the relationship either strengthened or strained, depending on how much truth we allowed into the room. Some days felt hopeful, some days felt fragile, some days felt final. And through all of it, I stayed grounded in one unshakable fact. I no longer needed to prove my worth through service. Whether this marriage survived or not, I would not return to the version of myself who earned love through exhaustion. That woman was gone. The last chapter would not be about whether my husband chose me. It would be about whether I chose the life I had built, with him or without him. And either way, I already knew the ending would be mine. The decision didn't arrive in a dramatic moment. There was no slammed door, no final argument, no tearful confession that wrapped everything up neatly. It came quietly on an ordinary morning while I was standing in the kitchen watching sunlight crawl across the counter. I realized I was calm. Not relieved, not triumphant, calm. And that was how I knew. For weeks after our hardest conversations, my husband tried, not perfectly, not consistently, but sincerely. He caught himself when his mother complained. He asked before committing us to plans. He checked in with me instead of assuming I would adjust. Sometimes. Other times, old habits crept back in. A delayed response when his family criticized me. A subtle urge to keep peace instead of speak truth. A hesitation that told me exactly where fear still lived. And that was the thing. Effort mattered, intent mattered, but patterns mattered more. One evening after a long day, he came home and said, "Mom thinks you're still holding a grudge." I looked at him. "What did you say?" He hesitated, just a fraction. "I told her you're working through things," he replied. That hesitation told me everything. Not because it was malicious, because it was reflex. The reflex to soften, to buffer, to manage her feelings before honoring mine. He hadn't chosen her over me, but he hadn't fully stopped choosing comfort over clarity either. And I understood something then that I hadn't allowed myself to understand before. Love does not fail in one moment. It fails in small hesitations that never fully disappear. That night I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I sat with the truth. The truth was not that my husband didn't love me. The truth was that the version of partnership I needed required a level of courage he was still learning, and I was done waiting to see if he would ever master it. A few days later, I asked him to sit with me. "I need to tell you something," I said. He looked nervous. "Okay." "I don't regret staying this long," I continued. "I don't regret fighting for myself. And I don't regret giving us a chance." He nodded, listening. "But I can't build my future on potential," I said. "I need consistency." His face tightened. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I'm choosing the life I built," I said gently. "The one where I don't disappear." He went quiet. For a long time I added I thought leaving would mean I failed, or that I didn't try hard enough. Now I know that staying small would have been the real failure. Tears filled his eyes. "I wish I had been stronger sooner." "I know," I said, and I meant it. We didn't fight. We didn't beg. We didn't promise things we couldn't guarantee. We ended things with honesty. That mattered. The weeks that followed were strange in their peace. I moved into a small place of my own. Nothing extravagant. Clean, quiet, mine. I cooked when I wanted to. Rested when I needed to. Said no without rehearsing it in my head first. I noticed how my body felt without constant vigilance. Lighter. Steadier. Mine again. My former in-laws reacted exactly as expected. Shock, disbelief, blame. I didn't engage. I had said everything that needed saying already. My ex-husband tried to remain kind, respectful. We spoke occasionally, cordially. He understood even if it hurt. And slowly something remarkable happened. I stopped thinking about them. Not because I was numb, because my life was finally centered on me. Holidays came and went. This time I spent them how I chose. Sometimes alone, sometimes with friends, sometimes quietly without fanfare. No dread, no obligation, no performance. I realized that the revenge I had once imagined never arrived in the way stories promise. No grand apology, no public humiliation, no dramatic karma. What arrived instead was better. Freedom. Freedom from being the glue that held everyone together while I fell apart. Freedom from earning my place through service. Freedom from apologizing for having needs. The real revenge was not making them suffer. It was refusing to suffer anymore. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story, hear this clearly. Being useful is not the same as being valued. Being quiet is not the same as being respected, and love that costs you your dignity is not love. You do not have to stay where your presence is conditional. You do not have to perform to belong. You do not have to disappear to keep peace. The day I stopped showing up as the help was the day I started showing up for myself, and I never went back. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been treated like the default caretaker, the invisible worker, the one expected to hold everything together without acknowledgement, share your thoughts in the comments. Your story matters. And if you want to hear more real emotional stories about family betrayal boundaries and quiet revenge, remember to like, subscribe, and stay. Because sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is stop setting herself on fire to keep everyone else warm and choose the life she was always meant to live.